It's Darkside Phil's Game of the Year Awards for 2012, the top 10 best games of the year. Well, alright, we've certainly talked about a wide variety of great games so far in the countdown, but now it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty and discuss the top 2 games of the year. The games that I feel stood above the pack, were better than the rest, and really both deserve to be called Game of the Year. Who will win? Well, let's get started by talking about each game individually and why I feel they're great candidates. Let's start off this showdown talking about one of the most unlikely candidates, but actually one of the best games of the year, Telltale Games' episodic masterpiece, The Walking Dead. Now, Telltale Games has been making a name for themselves in the episodic gaming market. Over the past several years, they've come out with licensed titles that were released in 5 or more episodes over a certain period of time. Some of these included Back to the Future and Jurassic Park, but to be completely honest, they weren't anything to really write home about. It was neat that they had gotten these franchises and they were continuing the plots of these popular things, but the games left something to be desired. Wonky controls, really limited puzzle and gameplay. It was just kind of blasé, to say the least. But that all changed with this year's The Walking Dead. It really took the spirit and the essence of what the Walking Dead franchise is about and combined it with some of the best writing, the best character development, and the best story that I've seen in quite some time, and created what some could basically say is an artistic masterpiece. Now, on the surface, The Walking Dead may not seem like anything too unique. It's the typical zombie survival horror formula. You've got a group of strangers that meet up in the zombie apocalypse. They're trying to figure out what's going on, what are the rules about turning into a zombie and getting bitten, how do we survive, how do we find enough food. They go from place to place looking for supplies. Throughout the story, the characters kind of interact, and some of them hate each other, some of them like each other, they form alliances, there's some betrayals, they start to distrust each other. Of course, there's going to be some surprise, gruesome deaths, and some characters who may have been with you along for the ride the entire length of the story all of a sudden just die out of nowhere. And really, it's a gripping, interesting story. Some might say, well, I've already kind of heard this kind of story before, but really I think where the game shines is the fact that it takes this survival horror atmosphere and puts you into an interactive work of art. And I really feel that's what sets The Walking Dead above the rest of the pack. It takes a plot and a story and a group of unique characters who you probably could have seen be developed in any big AAA Hollywood movie or on an actual ongoing TV series and throws them into the interactivity of a video game, and it does so perfectly. You play the role of a person who is a convict and accidentally escapes from the police car when the zombie apocalypse happens. You run into a girl named Clementine who unfortunately has been stranded at home without her parents, and it's now your goal to take on the responsibility of being her guardian and finding a way to protect her and meeting up with all these people and trying to decide who do I trust. And really the core gameplay of the game is a lot of pointing and clicking, and a lot of people may say, oh, that's very wishy-washy, that's not enough to make a great game, most of it is just watching a cutscene and picking a dialogue option here or there. But the key with The Walking Dead is that what you do directly influences the gameplay. If you make an alliance with one certain person, it may mean life or death for another. There are characters who will die during the course of the game because you chose one thing or the other thing, and the alliances that you form are actually going to determine where the game goes. Now, ultimately, at the end of the game, no matter what choices you've made, you do get the same generic ending. But that doesn't mean that the journey wasn't worth it. Being able to see how these characters interacted, making alliances with the people who you morally find yourself siding with. You will find times during the gameplay when you have to make a moral choice. This person is possibly infected or is possibly going to die. Do you kill them in order to ensure the safety of Clementine and everyone else around you? Or do you try to protect them and take care of them until the final moments if and when they turn? And you're going to find yourself having these moral dilemmas more often than not, and it's an awesome feeling. It's also awesome, some of the dialogue, some of the characters and their personalities. You actually kind of start to feel friendly with these characters, almost as if you know them in real life, and you kind of start to side with them and care about them, and then to see them get torn away in certain circumstances can be heart-wrenching and heartbreaking. The fact that the game is 5 episodes, each episode is roughly about an hour and a half long, some were a little bit longer, some were a little bit shorter, but also the fact that the game was selling, I believe, when it was upon release for like $20-something, and right now you can probably get it for a discounted rate of around $15 on Steam. This game is just such an emotional blast, and let me tell you, and I said this before and I'll say it again, out of all the games I played this year, The Walking Dead moved me more emotionally than any other game I've played. I really started to feel for these characters so much that at the end of the game, in the final episode, when we got down to the end of the line and people were getting killed and people were separated from us, I started to cry in certain parts, and that's when you really know that a game has a great writing, a great story, and someone's done a great thing. And that's really what Telltale has been missing in their past episodic games. Sure, Back to the Future was fun, but you didn't see me saying, having an emotional attachment to Marty or the Doc so much that I was just being, crazily moved. Here was a cast of completely new characters that were created for this game, and I really cared about them. So, The Walking Dead, first of all, a great bang for the buck. Second of all, a really fun game to the point where you might even call it an interactive work of art. Such great writing, such great dialogue, great character development. Definitely deserves to be nominated for Game of the Year. On the other side of this Western stare down, we've got Far Cry 3. One of the unique things about the Far Cry franchise is that every single game is a completely different story. You never have sequelitis with Far Cry because every time there's a new version of the game, it's a new reimagining of what the game should be. Far Cry 1 was set in a tropical setting, but was more about supernatural powers and different kinds of crazy things with mutations. Far Cry 2 was set in Africa with drug dealers and cartels and such. Far Cry 3 takes you to a tropical paradise where several young youths have gone to try to go on vacation. Unfortunately, this isn't exactly the safest of locations. They immediately become kidnapped. They are controlled by these pirates. They're held for ransom. They're not sure who in their group is even left alive. One of them luckily escapes, ends up running into a native tribe who seems to give him a mystical tattoo on his arm that gives him supernatural powers, and then he decides that it's his job to save his friends and get revenge for those who they may have killed. So, very interesting plot, an interesting take, and it really turns out to be a really unique experience. Now, some media outlets have gone as far to call Far Cry 3, it's Skyrim with guns. Now, I wouldn't necessarily go that far. Far Cry 3 at its core is a first-person shooter game. The difference here is that it's a completely open-world environment. There is a massive amount of side content to do, and although some might argue the side content is kind of repetitive, well, if you actually use variety in your attacks, if you properly level up your character, you'll constantly be getting new cool chained executions, stealth kills, better guns and better shooting abilities, to the point where the game won't really feel very repetitive. And I really feel it's this beautiful open world island that was designed by the makers of Far Cry 3 that is one of the game's biggest assets. It's just lush tropical fauna and waterfalls, and sometimes being on the top of a radio tower and looking down at how beautiful everything around you looks, you really feel immersed in the game and the gameplay, and it's a really fun experience. Now, with the exception of the main protagonist who you actually play in the game, some of the other characters are really fun, really interesting. The main villain, Voss, is one of the most intriguing and just entertaining villains to come around in quite a long time. In addition to this, the stealth gameplay is a really cool take on the FPS genre. Now, of course, we've seen this before with games like Deus Ex and Dishonored, even this year, but again, at its core, Far Cry 3 really is a first-person shooter that tries to take elements from other really interesting and fun games and kind of implements them perfectly. And really, at the core, what I think Far Cry 3 is kind of the epitome of what they could have done with the Far Cry engine and what they were trying to do with this game. It really feels like over each installment of the game, they've improved a little bit more, and finally they hit the mark with Far Cry 3. There's just so much gameplay here. The exploration, there's so many collectibles that you're going to want to get, not only to add to the story, but also to be getting experience points and leveling up and making your character better. It's so much fun to do aerial executions, jumping from high areas and killing someone with a knife, or zipping off a zip line and shooting with one hand to kill enemies, and just executing one guy from behind, taking his combat knife out and tossing it and getting it right into the head of another guy. It's so much fun, and it's just the combat really doesn't get old as long as you continuously level up your character and are getting better abilities. The story of Far Cry 3 is nothing to, shake a stick at, but it's still entertaining. It keeps you gripped, and you're going to find that you're going to be torn between, gee, do I want to continue the main plot of the game, or do I want to go off and do the side content? Do I want to go doing these assassination missions, the hunting missions, the exploration? Do I want to keep taking over these enemy bases, or should I try to advance the plot a little bit more and see what happens there? So there's just so much content, and it's so entertaining that you really find yourself immersed in this world for an elongated period of time. Now, the one point I want to make before we finish up with our showdown here is that I really get pissed off when I look at some media outlets who do their Game of the Year awards before the end of December. Spike TV. I mean, Far Cry 3, by far one of my favorite games of the year, one of the best games of the year, and it should not be missed by anyone. However, it was also the last major release of 2012, and some of these media outlets decided to do their Game of the Year awards before the game had even been out for a week. So obviously it's not going to be in the running, and that's really unfortunate. How can you hold a Game of the Year awards before the actual year is over and you've had a chance to play every major game? I really think that Far Cry 3 didn't get a fair shake with a lot of these, mainstream media and media outlets, and I think that it is one of the best games of the year. By far, it is the best first-person shooter of the year, and if you haven't checked it out yet, you definitely should. If not only for the story, which is an exceptionally long story, it's also got competitive multiplayer and online co-op. So you can't go wrong with Far Cry 3. Excellent value, amazing graphics, an interesting story, great characters, fun, entertaining, evolving gameplay, and a massive amount of replayability and just, game time that you're going to put into the game. It's a masterpiece. You definitely got to check it out, and it's definitely a great candidate for Game of the Year. The table is set. The Walking Dead versus Far Cry 3. Which game will win my Game of the Year? Find out when we come back. I'll announce the best game of 2012.